before we begin, because this is going to be a bit tough for some people. So let's all just take a nice big deep breath and kind of just find your Zen place, and we'll go from there. I did that a lot this morning. So Catherine, can you start with slide 2, please?
Yeah, 1 second. I was getting it going here. Let's see if I can advance. There we go.
There we go. Can everyone see slide 2? I would like to introduce you to this little girl. She was born in 1962 in Toronto to a French mother. I wrecked it. That's me. I'm sure you're not going to wonder who was up there. It's me. I was placed into the foster care system at 11 days old, and then shuttled between my birth mother and various foster homes 8 times until I was 2.5. At that point, I was then placed into, the province removed me from my mother, and I was placed into what would become my forever home. And I was subsequently adopted at age 4.5. So my journey began with grief then, but I didn't know it. And what I also didn't know is I carried that with me for most of my life. I could never figure out why there was those feelings of anger, of sadness, of despair. At age 41, I got married. I'm skipping over because I could talk for 4 hours, but I have an hour. Cathy, which you're going to twig me when I'm almost out of time. At age 49, I caught my husband having an affair. And it was that point that my world fell apart, and I fell apart. I went right back to this little girl and all of those unknowns that she had grown up with. But what really it gave me, it was the opportunity for when my journey and my awareness of grief began. We can go to slide 3, please, Catherine. Thank you. So the very best description came from a friend of mine. Her husband was dying of cancer. She was sitting at her desk one day, and she felt this big pain on the top of her forehead. And it kind of went back down to her neck. It went back up. And she said to her husband, I don't know what's wrong, but I have this terrible headache. Can you go and get me an aspirin? So he goes, there's no aspirin in the house, and life blanked out. And she said it to me perfectly. She said, Helen, it's like someone turned the lights off, and when they were turned on again, life has never been the same. What she had was a brain aneurysm. So she ended up in the hospital. Her husband was in the hospital. Their poor daughter was ready, anticipating the grief of the passing of her father, and then her mother might have passed away before. So whenever, and I'm sure, I am almost positive every single person in this meeting today has experienced grief. And I would think you should agree that when those lights are turned off and they're turned on again, let's just turn them off and go to slide 4. Please, Catherine. Yes, you can't see anything because this is the very essence of grief. There's no turning back. You're kind of lost right at this point. And can you go to slide 5, please? Sorry. So someone has turned the lights off, and the lights are on again, and life isn't the same. And this is where the work begins. And we can get lost for years. I have a story. So I could spend the next bit explaining all the stages of grief, but you know what? You can Google that. I'd rather explain those stages from my experiences from friends of mine, from experiences of people I have coached along the way, because I think that gives more personal attention to what those stages are. I have a dear friend who was married on February 29th. His daughter passed away from brain cancer. on 10 days later, March 10th, his wife passed away from breast cancer. He was then in that, where we see those dark clouds, for a long time. His son, who was married and had 2 children, came to the house one day and announced that he was gay and that he was leaving his family. So we're going to fast forward 20 years. He had no contact with his son because he couldn't understand his son's journey. So he cut him off. So 20 years later, he is well into his 80s. He's looking at the end of his life. And I said to him one day, so what is the thing that you would love the most to do, to see happen? What could you change, even though you can't change it? He said, I want my son. And I said to him, then reach out to him. And always when the universe is going to take you somewhere, it's going to. I went over to see him one day and he had a book on his counter, and it was written by his son. And I went, oh, and he goes, right? It just came in the mail. So as I'm leafing through it, he was saying, well, I haven't read it all yet, but he's such a good writer. And he had that father's pride in his child. And I said to him, oh my gosh, on the inside of the front of the book, there was an inscription. I said, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. He goes, what's beautiful? He hadn't seen that to pop, I love you. He was reaching out. He was so moved by it. I said, have you reached out? And he said, no, I just can't. And I said, yes, you can. And so he did. He went and he emailed him, and they were together again. And he said to me, I have not been this happy in years. So what he did, can we go to slide 5? Sorry, Catherine. So this is how he walked for many, many years, with his heart blown apart, because that's what it feels like. And I think typically we measure grief, and have in the past measured grief, that it equates to death only. And that's starting to change. And we are learning so much about it now. And it's definitely highlighted in these times. I don't want to bring COVID in. I'll bring in it a little bit, but this is just part of life. And grief could be loss of children, loss of wife, loss of family, as in my friend's case. It could be the loss of health, marriages, loss of homes through divorce, loss of homes through fire, loss of homes through bankruptcy, employment, youth for some women, their breasts, other body parts, siblings, spouses, friends, parents, children, and on and on and on and on. And what's so important for us now, it is everywhere. It is part of our life. And often we aren't aware that we are grieving. And more importantly, we don't even know that we can take the time to grieve it because we aren't aware of it. Catherine, can you go to slide 6, please? So this is how I want grief to look. So there's 5 stages. There's actually more stages, but I'm just skipping over this part because we'll get it as we go through this next hour. These are the principal stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So this is how we want it to look. I had a friend once who, I don't know the details of why she was telling me she was grieving, but she said, oh, I went through the 5 stages on Sunday. And I was like, oh, wow, that's pretty good, all in one day. And so I think that's, and while that's funny, I think a lot of us used to, or think now, that we should zip through those stages, and that's how it happens. It's very linear. No, it's not linear at all. The next slide, please, Catherine. This is how grief actually works. It's all mixed in there. There is no timeline. Catherine, there is a note on my computer. I'm just wondering, oh no, never mind, I fixed it. I took it off. Okay, I'm sorry. So this is how it works. It is all over the place, and it is that confusing, especially in the beginning. You're in that shock of what just happened to me. You're in that denial of what has just happened. You're trying to absorb whatever the situation is. And that's not just those 5 feelings. I'm going to add some on here. There's shock, there's fear, there's anxiety, there's guilt, there's despair, there's loss of faith, and. So I know I just kind of skipped over that part, but I'd rather explain some of this through my storytelling. So in the case of my friend whose son came back into his life, he was in denial for a long, long time. I watched him go through the depression. I watched him go through the anger. But you know what happened when he got back together with his son? Is he accepted it and actually really liked his son's husband, really liked him, and would often talk about the dinners they had together. And he was always so excited that he was going to come to his house. And it was just kind of let it go. It was quite beautiful. And then I'm going to talk about when he was facing his own mortality. And just a month or so ago, I had gone home to Ontario to sit with a sister friend who was battling cancer. She also was going through this grief work, depression, denial. It was really hard. I remember one day I had said to her, let me make all your meals for the week, just because that's what I needed to do to help. And so she's the most adorable woman on the planet. She's in her kitchen and she's showing me where her pots and pans are and where her cutlery is and where the spices are. And I was like, I know how to get around the kitchen. But I didn't say that because you know what? She just needed to be normal. She just needed to be normal because all of that stuff she was going through. So she was going and still is going through that grieving process. And if you can recognize that, one of the things that I always talk about with people, I'll ask, and if you guys think about this, is what are some of the things that people have said to you that you're just like, what? I see Nancy Jackson is here today. Hi, Nance. When she lost her pet, it's really important not to say to someone who loses their pet, it's just a dog, it's just a cat. Zip it. That's the number one thing I'm going to tell you. When people say, and when you're the sayer or you're hearing it, you have to, I love the sayings, just some of the things I've heard over my years. Well, at least you have. And it's like, well, I know I have that, but I'm allowed to be sad, angry, depressed, whatever, about what I don't have. We don't allow people and we don't allow ourselves. I remember when I was going through my divorce, a friend in town had lost her husband suddenly to a heart attack. And I remember when I heard that, I was like, oh, well, what am I worried about? So what I did was I diminished my experience. And we do that. We prioritize what someone else's grief is. It is absolutely not fair to say to someone, it's just a dog. Right, Nancy? Just wave if you hear. I see you waving. The other thing I heard quite often was, aren't you over him yet? It's like, yeah, no, because my journey is maybe a little bit different than what your journey is. And I believe that none of the things that are said are with malintent. I believe that. I think people really struggle with watching someone else be in pain. We want to make sure they don't feel terrible. We don't know what to do with that. And if we could learn kindness and patience, really, when someone's grieving, you know what they want? They want zip. They just want to be heard. They want to talk. And I notice over the years when someone says, aren't you over him yet? They tire of our grief. And the other thing that happens is my friend now, fast forward a decade, my friend can post pictures of her deceased husband and and have those beautiful memories, and they're beautiful. If I did that, because guess what? Beyond that grief, before that grief, I have those beautiful memories too. And if I posted, oh, I remember this beautiful day with my ex-husband, people would be like, uh-oh. And it's like, no, it's not uh-oh. We're allowed to cherish those moments. So what I would say is if you are the one that is facing someone with grief, is just kind of, find that, zip it. I always say, just zip it. You don't have to find the solution from them, because guess what? When you're in here and you're doing the work, it's up to you to decide when you're over it. It's up to you to decide if you want to share the experience. It's up to you if you want to sit and cry all day about it. It is entirely up to you. And so if you're facing someone like that, just honor what their journey is. And even though someone has gone through a similar experience, you actually still don't know what the other person feels like. You can empathize with them. You can say, and the last thing you should say if someone's like, oh, my husband had an affair and he left, or my husband passed away, the last thing you should do is say, well, when my husband did that, because they don't know how to absorb that, and you're not actually helping. So if you have any takeaway from today, zip it. It's really kind of bizarre talking like this, not seeing responses and stuff. Can we go to slide 9, please, Catherine? Thank you. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about with my journey of grief was understanding the foster care system. I see people say when I tell them I was moved 8 times between foster homes, they were trying to keep me with my birth mother. And we're talking in the 1960s. I don't know if it still happens now. I sure hope not. But what happened where that system failed, I don't know that it failed me, because now I have 20/20 hindsight. I am grateful that I was given up for adoption, because my mother was very, very troubled. My birth mother was very troubled, despite going into a home that was alcoholic and tons of pain and anger and rage. That's the place I needed to be. It was safer for me on some weird level. It was. But what happened was, I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I kind of go off course all the time. One of the things that I realized, sometimes the journey brings you where you're supposed to be. And that's one of the things I think people fight the most with grief, is that they don't understand why their journey is the way it is. And that's where you kind of have to dig deep to find what your gift is. Could you go to slide 9, please, Catherine? Thank you. So what can you do? So how do we navigate this without completely looking out of your mind, walking around? I had a moment when I was still living in the house that was my marital home, and I was so angry. I was just devastated and angry. And I remember buying a book on how to control your anger. And remember, I didn't know that I was just starting to understand what my grieving process was. So I'm reading this book. I went to bed at 6 o'clock at night because I just couldn't even function during the day, and my dog was laying beside me. And then about 6:20, I thought, oh, this isn't helping. So I went for a walk, and I didn't have the dog on the leash. And the neighbor had said something. So I kind of looked over. I thought she was just greeting me. And she was saying, do you think maybe the dog should be on a leash? Oh my gosh. I just went to the moon. That's where that Greek, French, and Italian upbringing came right into play. I F-bombed that poor girl I don't know how many times. And I'm walking away and I'm thinking, well, that book didn't work. And, and she's fine. I don't see her here today, but that's okay. I think we're still friends. But she understood, because she knew what was going on, but she understood. But can you imagine if he didn't understand what was going on? It would look crazy. So again, I'm not suggesting that if someone comes up to you and starts, going off and all of that, that you just kind of don't react if you can. And that's that anger piece where, and that was a year after we had actually split up. So that anger can come out of nowhere and still does if I want to give it time, but I've learned tools. So that says, how can we navigate this without being completely out of control? How can we normalize the process in our search to find that peace? And so there's lots of ways. First of all, when you get that awareness, it is the very worst time. It really is. You can go back to that storm cloud or that slide that had no color in it. You really are lost. And so some of the things you can do is you can talk about it if you want to. You can talk to a coach. You can talk to a therapist. You can find your spiritual leader. And it can be a minister, a priest, swami, a rabbi, whatever. You can go out into a field and talk to the universe and scream and yell, whatever that does to get it out of you, because that's just the beginning of that emotion that's just build up, build up, build up, build up, and you don't know. I am so positive everyone can has felt that build up. You have no control. And I think once you recognize you don't have control, that's the first step in maybe starting to understand what your journey is about. Be willing to be vulnerable would be the most important. And that's not a place for anyone that's comfortable to be vulnerable. And you have to walk through the pain, because if you don't, you will. I coached a client from back east this week who had an extraordinarily difficult journey with her father for a long time. He was not a nice man, and she was always trying to make sense of it. So we're going to fast forward, and now he is dying. And because of COVID-19, he has to be in her house. And even at the very best of times, I don't believe we should be the caregiver for our parents. But because of the circumstances, she's been put in this position, and she's angry and she's bitter, and she has every right to be, because guess what? She is grieving the relationship she never really understood or had with her father. And now guess what? Who's vulnerable is he's vulnerable. And it never makes sense to people when their parent. I remember when my mother was dying, she was so frail, not that scary woman that I had spent most of my life with. She was this frail, trembling little child, and I just couldn't make sense of it. And so this person that I'm helping out with back east, she can't make sense. She can't come to that spot where she can find that forgiveness, because she's got to still walk through the pain of what her relationship looked like with her father. And she's trying so hard to be that good person, and she is that good person. And she's trying so hard to find compassion for someone who was not nice to her for 60 years. So she needs to walk through that pain, and that is so hard to do. And I'll tell you, she is now listening to her father in the middle of the night, who's getting ready to move to the next world, who is dealing with his grief. And she's understanding now that his path, he had a horrible, horrible father when he was young, came from an alcoholic family. I don't believe it was a kind home by all accounts. And he never ever dealt with it. So guess what? If you can't walk through the pain, the universe is going to make you walk through it at some point. I believe. That's just my belief. I think that we go along, and then all of a sudden we're facing it. And when I got my divorce, I think I was given the ultimate gift from the universe, because it forced me at age 49 to really look at why I was so unhappy. So the other thing I will tell you too is to the things that you can do. I wrote down some stuff today. So you can sit still. So my friend earlier that I was telling you about, who met up with his son 20 years later, when I was in Ontario with my sister friend, he had had a series of strokes. So by the time I got back to Alberta, I couldn't go and see him because of COVID-19. Now, I have a dear friend that works at the hospital. She facilitated a FaceTime. We spoke a few times on the phone, and he was waiting for me to come and see him because I made the promise that I could, and I couldn't because of COVID, and he just didn't understand. I mean, he was in his he was late 80s, and he was so frail, he just didn't understand. And he passed away, and I couldn't go see him, and I remember being so heartbroken that I couldn't hold him one more time and tell him that I loved him and that I was so grateful for my time with him. And I was wandering around, and of course, I'm dealing with COVID-19. Now I don't have a business. Now I'm worried, I've got a new grandchild coming. How am I going to do this? I have to self-isolate. All these things are just coming at me. And I actually said to myself, stop. And I went and I spent a day on the couch honoring my friendship with him and honoring our journey and remembering all the beautiful parts to our, we used to have dinner dates, and we always would share baked spaghetti and meatballs at Petrino's. We would play weekly cribbage games, and we had a tally of who was winning. I was beating him, by the way, although if he were here, he wouldn't admit it. But what I did was I took that time to honor those feelings. And it's really important to do. And it's really hard to do because you kind of sit there and you think, oh my gosh, now I'm going to feel like, all day. But you need to do it. It's necessary to do because you need to sit and give space and give time to those experiences that you're going to miss. The other thing you can do is move. During COVID-19, I've taken up running recently. Love it. It is my little escape. Every day I'm up to 7K now. Um, I, I I need to move because I can't, if I sit, I think too much. The other thing I do at night before I go to bed is I meditate. And that's a really hard thing for me to do, is just to sit within myself. It's really hard, but I can do it. The other thing you can do is go outside and scream. The whole point to it is creating little rituals of remembering and honoring what you're missing is really important. And there's no limit, there's no rules. You can do whatever you want. I wouldn't suggest you run around F-bombing the neighbor, but if you can put yourself in those moments where you're honoring what you've gone through, it's really healing here. It's really healing the experience. The other thing that and I will tell you, I'm definitely not above what I speak about. I struggle with my grief every day. I have the most beautiful family you could ask for. My daughter-in-law and my son have given me the most precious little girl. And when I am, can we go to the slide, Catherine, the one, I think it's number 11 of me when I was a little girl. Oh, thank you. So my little granddaughter, she has the most loving, solid parents you could imagine. And every once in a while, this little one here that you're looking at, will come out of nowhere, and she's really sad. And she's sad because she didn't get that nurturing and that love. And they love her. They discipline her when it's needed. They are teaching her beautiful values that she will carry into her life. So this one had to learn the hard way. She had to wait 50 years to learn some of those values. So there is no time limit to grieving. What the trick is that you have to recognize that you're grieving and how you're going to carry that. Quite often I will tell her, I keep a little picture of her on my china cabinet, and I'll tell her quite often, hey, you know what? You're okay. I used to tell her she was going to be okay, but you know what? Now she is okay. And that's really powerful. So I would ask each of you to look at your little self, because that's quite likely where the grief began in some way, shape, or form. Not everybody, of course. And I think you need to understand, or we need to understand, that walk through the pain is really, really, really hard. Grief is tough. And sometimes we need it to be tough because it's going to force you to find your strengths. So I don't know if any of you know, but I think most of you know, but I have a podcast called Sharing Stories with Helen Rose. And what that does is it tells stories. Everyone has a story to tell. Everyone's journey is different, but there's that little theme through there, that little thread where what we thought life was going to be has not turned out to but what life is looking at for real. And that's when you need to dig deep, find your strength, which is your gift. Thank you. How much time do I have, Cathy? I must be coming to an end here pretty soon.
You're doing pretty well. You're at
okay.
about, yeah, you've got, let's say, a couple more minutes, and we can get into some questions.
Awesome. Well, I'm almost done. Can we go to slide 12? Oh, hold on before you do that. So this little girl, I kind of ruined it because you all know it's me, but now we can go to slide 12, please. So that little girl is this woman. And throughout my podcast stories, there is definitely one theme. When I ask people, if you could go back and change it, would you? And almost every single time they say no, because there is no going back when that light comes on and you're suddenly forced into, or you become aware of what your journey is all about. There's not one person I've ever spoken to that has said I wouldn't change it. Now, of course, I'm not talking about, I can't speak to the death of a child. I can't speak to the death of a sibling. However, who's calling me that isn't on this thing? Sorry. I can't speak to that, but I can tell you just from all the people that I speak through my coaching, through my writing, through my journaling retreats, that they have found their gift and they're so grateful for it. So I know this was kind of a quick through, but well, we only had an hour to do, but I hope that you got something out of the talk today, and I'm excited to open it up to questions. There are no right or wrong answers. There are no emotions. The thing that I will say is that the biggest takeaway is to be kind to yourself. And if you're looking at someone who is in the depths of their grief, they're just learning that first part, is to zip it, because it's just not helping. And you may learn from someone who is working through that loss and finding their strength and their gift. Thank you so much. Catherine?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm just going to stop sharing here, and we're going to start into questions. Let's just go. I got to just get out of this. There we go. Excellent. So everybody should be able to see one another now. I'm going to just stop the